Following the silence of the hospital lobby, the black sedan glided through the iron gates of the mountain estate. Alicia stepped into a world of cold marble and silent, bowing staff. Jae-hyun didn't just provide a room. He provided a fortress. As Alicia settled into the guest wing, she discovered that the weight her colleagues had laughed at was now the most precious thing in this house. Jae-hyun, the man the world called a monster, would sit in the shadows of her room until she fell asleep. His presence a silent promise that the bad guys from her past would never find her again. The peace was interrupted by the arrival of a woman who carried authority like a weapon. Madame Kong, Jae-hyun's mother, didn't come with flowers. She came with a contract. She looked at Alicia's natural hair and her nursing hands with a disdain that felt like a surgical blade. She offered Alicia a choice: a vast sum of money to leave the child and disappear, or a life of misery under the scrutiny of a family that valued blood over heart. Alicia didn't flinch. She tore the contract in half, telling the matriarch that her child's love wasn't a commodity to be traded, a moment of defiance that left the older woman stunned. Despite the luxury, Alicia struggled with Jae-hyun's lethal methods. She learned he had not only fired her tormentors but had ensured they would never work in medicine again. When she confronted him, he stood in his library, the dragon tattoo on his arm catching the light. He told her that he was a monster so she didn't have to be. He wasn't just protecting her. He was erasing any memory of her pain. Alicia realized then that while she wanted to heal the world, Jae-hyun was prepared to burn it down if it meant keeping her safe. The tension turned to terror when a rival syndicate attempted to infiltrate the estate. A man disguised as a nurse tried to enter the wing where Alicia was resting. Her medical instincts, honed by years of trauma ward experience, flared when she noticed the man's improper gowning and the way he avoided eye contact. She didn't scream, she acted. Using a heavy medical tray, she defended herself until Jae-hyun's security arrived. The event proved to Jae-hyun that Alicia wasn't a victim to be shielded, but a woman with a spine of steel who would fight for their unborn heir. One evening the roles reversed. Jae-hyun returned from a business meeting, bleeding from a gunshot wound. The estate's private doctor was hours away, and the roads were blocked. With her hands slick with the blood of the man she was beginning to love, Alicia transformed the dining table into an operating room. She performed emergency surgery with the limited tools available, her voice steady and her gaze unfaltering. In the flickering light, she saw the man behind the mask, a man who stayed conscious through the pain only to make sure she was still breathing. As Alicia entered her final trimester, Jae-hyun insisted on a public debut. At a high-stakes Mafia gala, Alicia walked in wearing the Kong family obsidian diamonds. The elite of Seoul, who had whispered about the black nurse and her scandalous pregnancy, fell silent as they saw her. She didn't hide her curve, she wore it like armor. When a rival socialite made a snide comment about her background, Alicia used her clinical knowledge to publicly diagnose the woman's obvious cosmetic surgery failures, proving that her wit was just as sharp as Jae-hyun's blade. The fake protection evolved into a terrifyingly real love. One night, while watching the snow fall over the mountains, Jae-hyun admitted that he hadn't claimed her because of the baby, but because she was the first person to ever look at him without fear. He gave her a simple gold locket, not a diamond, containing a photo of the two of them. It was a promise that his heart belonged to her, regardless of the child. Alicia realized that the weight she had been shamed for was actually the anchor that had finally brought a drifting, dangerous man home. The peace was shattered when Alicia went into premature labor during an attack on the estate. With the power cut and the house under siege, Jae-hyun held her hand in the dark while his men fought off intruders in the hallway. It was a baptism of fire and pain. Between contractions, Alicia gave Jae-hyun instructions on how to assist her. In the midst of the chaos, a healthy cry rang out. Jae-hyun wept as he held his son, a tiny prince born in a fortress, proving that their love was stronger than any army sent to destroy them. Months later, the mountain estate was filled with light and the scent of lilies. There was no more mockery, no more hiding. Jae-hyun stood in the garden where cherry blossoms were falling like snow. He knelt once more, But this time it wasn't for the press or the hospital staff. He asked Alicia to marry him for real, not for the sake of an heir, but for the sake of the woman who had turned a monster into a father. As Alicia said yes, she realized that her life hadn't ended when she gained weight. It had truly begun. "Is there a little prince in there, Nurse Alicia?" the small boy asked, his eyes wide with innocent wonder as he pointed to her midsection. Alicia Monroe froze, her hand instinctively hovering over the slight curve of her belly beneath her scrubs. She managed a soft, strained smile, ruffling the boy's hair. "Maybe just a very big lunch, Leo," she whispered. She was currently ducked behind the tall nursing station at St. Jude's Seoul, trying to avoid the piercing gaze of her ex-boyfriend and the snickering of the head nurses. She didn't know that this small, innocent exchange was the final moment of her life as an underdog. She was unaware that the secret she carried, the weight they mocked her for, belonged to Kang Jae-hyun, the cold-blooded king of Seoul, and the most feared mafia boss in the country. If you're just tuning in, please like, subscribe, share, and click the notification button for more engaging stories. Your support means everything. Now let's dive in. Alicia Monroe had been checking vitals in the prestigious Seoul International Hospital like she did every day when she heard that familiar, arrogant laugh echoing down the hallway. It was Mark, her ex-fiancé, a high-ranking surgeon who had dumped her the moment his career took off, claiming she no longer fit the image of a power couple. Lately, the mockery had turned cruel. Mark and his clique of nurses had begun making loud comments about her letting herself go, and her sudden weight gain. Alicia knew how this went. They would corner her in the break room or loud talk her in front of patients to see her blush in shame. She tucked herself further into the shadow of the workstation, trying to finish her charts so she could slip away. She pressed her back against the cold laminate, her breath shallow. Outside the station, Mark's voice rose, thick with entitlement. "Where's our favorite nurse? Alicia, don't tell me you're hiding in the pantry again. You've put on so much weight, I'm surprised you can fit behind the desk." His new girlfriend's laugh followed, sharp and eager. "Maybe she's eating for two. Though who would ever want to give her a baby?" Alicia squeezed her eyes shut, her hand trembling. 20 minutes. That was all she needed. 20 minutes for the shift change, for the VIP wing to open, for them to get bored and go back to their surgeries. She had a prenatal vitamin tucked in her pocket and a plan to move to a smaller clinic by the end of the month, but for now, she was trapped in a world that saw her as less than, totally unaware that the man who owned the very ground they stood on was currently watching the security feed with a lethal, protective rage. Alicia turned and walked away, her shoes squeaking against the linoleum in a frantic, uneven rhythm. She didn't look back at Mark or Sarah, but she didn't need to. She could feel their laughter following her like a physical weight, sticking to her skin. She needed to get to the supply room, to find a moment of silence where she could breathe without the suffocating pressure of their judgment. But as she moved through the pediatric ward, the silence she craved was replaced by a different, more insidious noise. It wasn't loud, but it was pervasive, the sound of muffled snickers and the frantic rhythmic tapping of thumbs on smartphone screens. As she passed the main nursing station, 2 junior residents looked up from a tablet, their eyes darting immediately to her midsection before they huddled together, whispering behind their hands. Then her pocket vibrated. A notification from the hospital's internal private network, MedConnect, flashed on the screen. The headline of the trending post made her heart stop. "Is St. Jude's hosting a secret buffet? Our favorite nurse seems to be the only attendee." She tapped the link, her breath catching. It caught the exact moment Mark had loomed over her, his voice clear and venomous as he joked about her bursting out of her scrubs. The video had been edited with a cruel, slow-motion zoom on her waist. Alicia ducked into a small utility closet, the sharp scent of lavender floor cleaner suddenly nauseating. She slid down the door until she hit the floor, her knees drawn to her chest. She felt a hot, stinging tear escape. She was more than just a nurse. She was a woman who had worked 3 jobs to put herself through school. And yet, to these people, she was nothing more than a punchline. Alicia gripped her phone until her knuckles turned white. She was at her breaking point, isolated and humiliated, unaware that far across the city, the man who called that prince his heir was watching the video feed, his eyes turning to chips of lethal ice. The automatic glass doors hissed open, and the hospital lobby, usually a place of chaotic healing, fell into an unnatural graveyard silence. A phalanx of men in razor-sharp black suits flooded the entryway. At the center of the formation walked Kang Jae-hyun. He looked like a shadow carved from obsidian. His black suit was tailored to a lethal edge, and his eyes scanned the room with a gaze that made the bravest surgeons lower their heads. Behind him, Mark, who had been laughing moments before, went pale. His smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, primitive terror. Jae-hyun didn't look at the monitors displaying the viral video. His focus was a laser, locked entirely on the trembling woman standing by the utility closet. The sound of his handmade leather shoes echoed against the tile as he crossed the distance. When he reached Alicia, the air around them seemed to vibrate with his presence. Ignoring the hundreds of gasping onlookers, the most powerful man in Seoul did the unthinkable. He slowly lowered himself, one knee hitting the sterile floor in a gesture of absolute fealty. He took Alicia's trembling, scrub-worn hand in his own. He brought her knuckles to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. "I am sorry I am late, my queen," he said, his voice a low, resonant growl that carried to every corner of the silent lobby. "The world has been very loud in my absence. It is time I taught them the cost of speaking your name with anything less than reverence." "Your service here is concluded," Jae-hyun stated, his voice devoid of emotion yet carrying a weight that made the very air feel heavy. He wasn't just talking to Alicia. He was addressing the institution. "Pack nothing. My men will ensure your belongings are handled. You will never set foot in this den of mediocrity again." Before Alicia could find her voice to process the whiplash of the last 10 minutes, she was being swept toward the entrance. Outside, a fleet of identical obsidian sedans waited. She was tucked into the plush, scent of leather interior before she could even look back. They drove in a silent high-speed convoy, leaving the neon sprawl of Seoul for the mist-shrouded peaks of the surrounding mountains. As the sun began to dip, the Black Suit Fortress came into view. It was a monolithic estate of glass and dark stone, perched precariously on a cliffside. The heavy iron gates hissed shut behind them, sealing the world away. Inside, the foyer was a cathedral of marble and silence. Alicia stood in the center of the vast room, her stained scrubs and natural bun a stark contrast to the opulence. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why all of this? The hospital, the kneeling. Why are you doing this for me?" Jae-hyun walked toward her, his shadow completely enveloping her. He reached out, his fingers brushing the soft fabric of her scrubs, right over her stomach. "You think I didn't know, Alicia?" His voice was a low, dangerous vibration. "You think the most powerful man in this country wouldn't know the moment his legacy took root? I have been watching you from the shadows since the night we met. I will not let my heir be born in a place of mockery. In this fortress, no one will ever dare to look down on you again." The morning light in the mountain estate was sharp and unforgiving. Alicia had barely spent a night in the fortress when the air changed from heavy protection to icy scrutiny. The sound of a silk dress rustling preceded the appearance of Madame Kang, a woman whose elegance was as sharp as a razor and whose eyes held the coldness of a winter sea. Alicia stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, draped in a silk robe. She felt exposed, a specimen being studied. Madame Kang didn't offer a greeting. Instead, she circled Alicia slowly, her gaze lingering on Alicia's natural hair, the warm brown of her skin, and finally, the subtle curve of her stomach. "So," Madame Kang finally spoke, her voice like cracking ice. "This is the American nurse who thinks she can carry the future of the Kang Syndicate. My son has always been impulsive, but this is a stain on a 1,000-year bloodline." Alicia felt the familiar sting of judgment, but this wasn't like the petty mockery of the hospital staff. This was deeper. "I am not a stain, madam," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. I am the woman carrying your grandchild. And while you see an outsider, I see a child who deserves more than a legacy of coldness and walls. Madame Kang's lips thinned into a dangerous line. You speak of things you do not understand. In our world, blood is not just life. It is power. You are soft. You are weak. Before Madame Kang could respond, the heavy doors swung open. Jaehyun entered, his presence immediately shifting the gravity of the room. He walked straight to Alicia, placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. Mother, he said, his voice a low warning. Alicia is not under your jurisdiction. She is under mine. Madame Kang turned her icy gaze to her son. She will break, Jaehyun. And when she does, the weight of your choices will crush this family. Then let it, Jaehyun replied, his eyes locked on Alicia. Because I would rather see this empire fall than see her treated with anything less than the respect she has earned. Alicia sat in the glass-walled library, her fingers tracing the edge of an iPad as she browsed the morning headlines. A notification from a medical news forum made her breath hitch. Sudden leadership change at St. Jude's International. Board dissolved overnight. She scrolled through the report. The hospital had been acquired by a shell company linked directly to the Kang Group. But it wasn't just a corporate takeover. The article detailed the immediate termination of several senior staff members for gross ethical violations. Mark's name was at the top of the list, followed by Sarah. Their careers weren't just over. They were erased. They will never speak your name again, a voice rumbled from the shadows. Jaehyun stood there, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark ink of a dragon coiling around his forearm. You bought the hospital? Alicia asked, her voice a mixture of awe and dawning horror. Mark. His entire life was that career. You destroyed them. Jaehyun walked toward her, his presence filling the room with a cold metallic weight. He used his position to make you feel small. In my world, Alicia, when someone attempts to diminish what is mine, I remove their ability to ever try again. Alicia stood up, the tablet slipping from her lap. But I'm a nurse. This feels like violence. You're using your power to crush people like insects. Jaehyun's expression didn't soften. He reached out, his hand settling gently on her shoulder. I am a monster to the world so that I can be a shield for you, he whispered. Do not ask me to be a good man, when the world is full of wolves waiting to tear you apart. My protection isn't a gesture of kindness. It is a decree of survival. Alicia looked into his icy gaze and saw the terrifying truth. He didn't know how to love without a weapon in his hand. The nursery was a dream of ivory silk and hand-carved mahogany. Jaehyun had spared no expense, filling the room with high-tech monitors and soft toys that felt out of place in a house built on blood. Alicia spent her evenings there, trying to find peace. But tonight the air felt wrong. Years of working the night shift in a trauma ward had sharpened her senses. She noticed a small, metallic glint near the base of the high-end baby monitor. At the same moment, the heavy door creaked. A man in a technician's jumpsuit entered. Forgive me, Miss Monroe, he said, his voice flat. Routine maintenance on the air filtration system. Alicia stood still, her heart beginning to drum. She didn't look at the toolkit, she looked at the man. Her nursing instincts began a mental triage. His pupils were blown wide, a fine tremor shook his right hand, and the scent clinging to him wasn't the industrial soap of the staff, it was the acrid smell of adrenaline. The filtration vent is on the other side of the room, Alicia said, her voice dropping into an authoritative tone. And your badge is for the gardening detail, not electrical. The man froze, his hand dipping toward his pocket. You're lying, Alicia countered, stepping instinctively in front of the crib. You're sweating, your heart rate is likely over 100. Who sent you? The intruder lunged, but Alicia didn't scream. She grabbed a heavy decorative vase and swung with the precision of someone who knew exactly where the human skull was most vulnerable. The vase shattered against his shoulder just as the nursery doors were kicked open. Jaehyun surged into the room. Before the intruder could draw a breath, He was pinned against the wall. "He was planting this," Alicia said, pointing to the sophisticated bug. Jae-hyun didn't look at the device. He looked at Alicia. "You have a nurse's eyes, Alicia. You see the things others miss." He dragged the intruder toward the door, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have a different kind of maintenance to perform." The heavy silence of the mountain estate was shattered not by a scream, but by the frantic screech of tires. Alicia was in the kitchen when the back doors burst open. Two of Jae-hyun's lieutenants stumbled in, supporting their boss. Jae-hyun's white dress shirt was ruined, soaked crimson from a jagged wound across his side. "Ambush at the docks," one of the men gasped. "The hospital is too far. Nurse Alicia, please. He's losing too much." The underdog who had been mocked vanished. In her place, the seasoned trauma nurse took command. "Put him on the dining table. Now," Alicia barked. "Get me the emergency medical kit from the nursery." As she cut away the silk of his shirt, her hands were steady. The wound was deep. Shrapnel had torn through the muscle. "Alicia," Jae-hyun rasped, his hand reaching out to catch her wrist. "The baby." "Get away from me. It's too much blood." "Be quiet, Jae-hyun," she whispered, leaning over him. For the first time she saw the man behind the monster. She saw the old scars littering his torso, marks of a life spent in a war he never asked for. She saw the genuine terror in his eyes, not for his own life, but for the safety of her and their child. With the precision that had once earned her the respect of the city's top surgeons, Alicia began to work. She clamped the artery with a steady hand, her fingers slick with the blood of the man she realized she had come to love. As she stitched the last layer of skin, the sun began to rise over the mountains. Alicia collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking as the adrenaline began to fade. Jae-hyun reached out, his fingers brushing the curve of her stomach before finding her hand. "You saved me," he murmured. "I saved the father of my child," she corrected him, her eyes filling with tears. "But don't ever make me do that again. I'm a nurse, Jae-hyun, not a soldier." The mountain estate was no longer a sanctuary. Tonight, it was a battlefield draped in velvet and gold. Alicia stood before the mirror, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that flowed over her pregnant form like liquid jewel. Around her neck, the Kong family heirloom, a necklace of raw diamonds and obsidian, felt cold against her skin. "You look like a queen prepared for war," Jae-hyun's voice came from the doorway. He was fully recovered, dressed in a formal black tuxedo. "I feel like an imposter," Alicia whispered. "To them, I'm still just the nurse who wasn't enough." Jae-hyun leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "They will see what I see. You aren't hiding, Alicia. You are the standard." When they entered the Grand Seoul Ballroom, the atmosphere turned to ice. As Alicia walked in on Jae-hyun's arm, the music seemed to falter. The elite of Seoul turned as one, their eyes full of calculated judgment. "Is that her?" a voice hissed from the crowd. "The American nurse." Alicia felt the familiar heat of shame, but then she felt the kick of the baby beneath her hand. She didn't look down. She didn't shrink. When Madame Kong approached them, the older woman looked Alicia up and down. "You are wearing the diamonds of my grandmother," she noted. Alicia met her gaze with a calm steady. "I am wearing the jewelry of the family I protected," she replied, her voice ringing clear. "I've seen what real power looks like, and it isn't found in a dress. It's found in the courage to stay when everyone else runs." For the first time, Madame Kang's icy mask flickered with respect. Jae-hyun pulled Alicia closer, his possessive gaze warning the room that the nurse they mocked was now the most untouchable woman in the country. The mountain estate was now filled with a sound that was entirely new to its cold marble halls, the high, thin cry of a newborn. Alicia sat in the nursery, the Prince Leo had once envisioned finally resting in her arms. He was perfect, a beautiful blend of her warmth and Jae-hyun's intensity. The enemies who had circled them were gone. The door creaked open, and Jae-hyun stepped in. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket or his mask of lethal indifference. He looked tired, his eyes soft. He sat on the edge of the rocking chair, his large hand gently stroking the infant's cheek. "He looks like you," Jae-hyun whispered. "He has your light." Alicia looked up at him. "And he has your strength, Jae-hyun. But he won't have to use it the way you did." Jae-hyun went quiet for a moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not the heavy diamonds of the Kong family, but a simple, elegant band of rose gold set with a single ruby. "The world thinks I claimed you because of the heir," Jae-hyun said, his voice a low vibration. "But they don't know the truth. I didn't need an heir to know you were my soul, Alicia. You saved me long before you ever picked up a suture needle." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles he had once kissed in a crowded hospital lobby. "I don't want a queen for my empire. I want a partner for my life." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Alicia leaned her head against his shoulder, the weight of the past year finally lifting. She was no longer the girl hiding behind a nursing station. She was loved, she was powerful, and she was home. As the cherry blossoms began to fall outside the window, Alicia realized that her weight hadn't been a burden at all. It had been the foundation of a new, unbreakable legacy. The mountain estate was finally quiet, the scent of cherry blossoms drifting through the open balcony doors. In the nursery, the steady, soft rhythm of their son's breathing was the only sound. Alicia stood by the window, looking out at the glittering lights of Seoul, no longer feeling like a fugitive in a fortress, but like a woman who had finally found her ground. Jae-hyun entered silently, his presence no longer carrying the cold, metallic weight of his office. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white sleeves rolled up, revealing the dragon tattoo that Alicia had once feared but now recognized as a symbol of the protection he provided. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the same horizon. "I used to look at this city and see a chessboard," he said, his voice a low, resonant vibration. "Every person was a piece to be moved or removed. I built these walls to keep the world out, never realizing I was just building a bigger cage for myself." He turned to her, and for the first time, the King of Seoul looked entirely vulnerable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, there were no obsidian diamonds or heavy family heirlooms. Inside was a simple, elegant band of rose gold set with a single brilliant African ruby, a gem that matched the warmth and fire Alicia had brought into his life. "The world thinks I claimed you because you carried my heir," Jae-hyun said, stepping closer until his shadow completely enveloped her. "They think our union is a transaction of bloodlines and legacy. But they don't know the truth." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles he had once kissed in a crowded hospital lobby. "I didn't need a son to know you were my soul, Alicia. You saved me long before you ever picked up a suture needle. You saved me the moment you looked at a monster and decided he was worth healing." He slowly lowered himself to one knee. This wasn't for the press, the rival syndicates, or his status-obsessed mother. This was a private surrender. "I don't want a queen for my empire, Alicia. I want a partner for my life. I want the woman who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong and who stays when the rest of the world runs." He looked up at her, his icy eyes now burning with a soft, steady heat. "Alicia Monroe, will you marry me? Not for the Kong name and not for the sake of the baby, but because you want to walk beside a man who is finally learning how to be a human again." Tears blurred Alicia's vision as she looked from the ring to the man who had burned down a hospital's reputation just to protect her dignity. She reached down, cupping his face, her thumb brushing against the jawline she had once stitched back together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice clear and certain. "I'll marry you, Jae-hyun. Not because you're a king, but because you're mine." As he slipped the rose gold band onto her finger, the weight of the past year, the mockery, the hiding, the fear, finally evaporated. He rose and pulled her into a kiss that tasted of salt and absolute promise. Outside, the cherry blossoms fell like snow, a silent witness to a legacy that was no longer built on shadows, but on a love that had finally found its light.